Welcome back, guys. So, I'm not sure if you knew this, but I'm a bit of an AYN fan. The original Odin was my favorite handheld of 2022, and still is one of my favorite handhelds of all time, only being beat out by the Odin 2, which released last year. But for all my praises of their devices over the past few years, they haven't been fully free of controversy. For a bit of a recap, let's go back to May of 2022 when AYN announced their first Windows handheld, the Loki. I remember this time being exciting but also confusing. AYN was still a new company, so to see them releasing, or at least announcing, a new device so close to their last one just a few months after was really confusing. But I pre-ordered the Loki Max the night it went live and sat on my butt and waited, hoping it would arrive soon after. Boy, was I wrong. We'll talk more about that in a second, but for now, think of this video as a re-review. I hadn't had much experience with PC gaming when I first reviewed this, and hell, I still really don't, but the experiences I've had with this device I think warrant a little bit of a retrospective, or just a look back to see how my opinions have changed. Because I think I'm starting to like this thing better than the Steam Deck. Okay, so before this video starts, I just do want to say that I was looking at AYN's website for like screenshots and stuff to put in the video, and it looks like they completely removed the Loki models from their website entirely, and I was like, oh, interesting. So I checked their Discord, and someone said that the Loki Max is discontinued full stop, which I find interesting. I don't know if that means that they're going to announce a new Windows handheld soon or something of that matter, but right now it is just completely impossible to officially get a Loki model, which I find very interesting. But I'm still reviewing this device again because I already did all the work in this video. I'm not scrapping it, so please watch. This device was and still is the only device AYN didn't do a Indiegogo campaign for, which caused a lot of problems and is what eventually made them go back to Indiegogo for the Odin 2's launch. For lack of better wording, the launch was a mess. The website crashed and I couldn't get my order in for like 45 minutes, which may not seem like all that big of a deal, but for a device that ships out based on how soon you order it, I wanted to be one of the first. So waiting 45 minutes on a device that was kind of highly anticipated was annoying and probably ended up adding to my wait time. I did get my order in eventually, and that was that for a while. I did my typical, I pre-ordered the blah blah blah, I pre-ordered the Loki Max video the next day talking about the model I ordered, the Loki Max, and I waited. AYN gave us sporadic updates via their Discord, which was nice, but it was nowhere near as consistent as the ones they gave for the original Odin, so it really left something to be desired and left me weary, but I still held out and didn't cancel my pre-order. At the time, I felt like I was one of the few people still giving AYN the benefit of the doubt. I would definitely criticize them whenever they did something stupid or went radio silent about the Loki's expected launch, but I kept my pre-order in and held out hope that I would like my Loki as much as I did my Odin, and I'm glad I did, because 8 months later, I do. Once the device finally arrived, it was safe to say I was very excited.
It's here. Ferris, it's here. Ferris, the package is here. It's finally here.
I had waited 13 months for this thing to show up. I had experienced an entire school year before this thing decided to show up. So yes, I think it was warranted for me to be excited. The day it arrived, I was working at a summer camp and had notifications on for the UPS app, so once the device was out for delivery, I got a notification on my watch, and for the entire day, I was so anxious just waiting to get home because all I wanted to do was use my Loki. Once I did arrive home, I ran to the door and filmed my unboxing video, not even sure if I'd like the device. I was just so excited to finally have it in my hands that the anticipation and any other adjective that would be useful right here got to me. The unboxing experience was very nice. It came in this big box with a case included. I don't think they included it with future orders, but the case and 100-watt charging brick were a very nice inclusion, especially compared to the 45-watt charging brick the Steam Deck comes with. The box is sleek and it's what I was hoping for after waiting 13 months. The inside was nice. It came with a card detailing all its shortcuts and hotkeys that make the Windows desktop experience much easier to stomach, and the device was sitting right underneath. The device felt noticeably different from the Odin, but in a good way. Everything they could do to make the experience better was done. They made the device wider and spread things out, so reaching for the D-pad or right stick wasn't an uncomfortable experience. The face buttons, triggers, and joysticks were bigger and felt better, and the whole device was just bigger, making it a lot easier to play for long periods of time. My first impressions were great. Windows hasn't ever really been a great experience on any of these handhelds, so that's not really something you can fault it for, especially after they put in so many hotkeys to try and make that experience better. But everything felt nice, except for the bumpers. They kind of felt a little mushy, but besides that, everything felt great. But that was 8 months ago. Opinions change. people change. The Odin 2 released last November, and I absolutely loved it without having to go through an annoying pre-order process for it. The Loki, however, had a very annoying pre-order process. The pre-order struggle and the long wait time will always be something that I hold against this thing and AYN as a whole, just because I love this thing, but that wait time was hard to get through. But I've talked about those things ad nauseum, so let's ignore them for right now. Okay, so a quick TLDR if anyone just wants to know if I still like it. I absolutely love this thing. I wasn't sure how I'd feel about it, especially after getting my Steam Deck like 10 months prior, but I love this thing so much. I'm sure you all know that since this channel is focused mainly on emulation, that when I bought this thing, I was focusing mostly on the emulation capabilities. But since then, since I've gotten this thing, I've realized that I've used it a lot more for PC and Steam gaming more than anything else. And that has a lot more to do with me than emulation, but it's something we'll touch on more later. There have been firmware updates for the Macs released by AYN, but while they have changed a few things, it hasn't been substantial. The biggest thing for me was that before the firmware update, when you wanted to switch to mouse and keyboard mode, you'd have to hold down these two triggers, and you would only be able to tell that you switched via the Windows connection noise that would play, which was annoying because I don't have the volume up on this very often, and so I don't hear that notification and just have to guess. And the delay is a little too long for me to just like immediately start using it as if it's a mouse and keyboard. But through the new firmware, they've changed it so now the device vibrates when you switch through the modes, which is a lot better because now I know when I'm gonna switch between the modes that I won't be holding down for like 16 seconds, not even knowing I've switched already. That might just be a skill issue on my part because I may just not have figured that out, but another change that's more annoying than anything is how they changed the RGB lighting. Because before, the RGB lights used to have different options for how they would pulse, and it would go through the entire spectrum of colors that the Loki, like the colors could show. But now, after the firmware update, it only lets you do one option, which is auto or manual. Manual is almost always used by me to just have them be off or at a single color. Auto only switches between red, green, and blue, which is very disappointing because I loved how it would switch between all the different colors. It just looked nice and I miss it. It's not something I want to dwell on for too long because it doesn't really matter, but I did want to touch on it because I am sad that it's gone from the Loki Control Center. I wish they would bring back those different options that were there when the device first released. Going back a little bit, you might be wondering, if you play mostly Steam games on here, why don't you just play on a Steam Deck that you already have? Well, I want to touch on that for a second because I think there are a few major reasons or a few major things that make this thing better than the Steam Deck. The first of those reasons being that the Loki Max and all Loki models are just smaller and more compact than the Steam Deck, and I would argue more comfortable. Obviously, the Steam Deck is as big as it is because of the giant 16:10 screen and the trackpads, but I would take the compromise of not having those to have a nice compact device with bigger grips and better controls, and I think the Loki delivers that. The grips are really the perfect size for how big this device is, and it makes playing this thing for long periods of time not uncomfortable because there's always a place for my hands to rest while curled that don't have them cramping up. Next, like I touched on a few seconds ago, I think the controls here are just substantially better. I like the controls on the Steam Deck and enjoyed using them for however long I used the Steam Deck before I got my Loki Max, but I do have to admit that I think the controls here are a little to be desired. Everything on the Loki just feels better, aside from maybe the bumpers. Like I said, those feel a bit mushy compared to the clicky ones on here. The triggers feel nicer, the joysticks have a larger travel radius, the D-pad feels clicky instead of mushy, and the face buttons are flat and clicky instead of the round ones on the deck. The placement of the D-pad isn't even a problem because, like I said, the device is wide enough so that curling my thumb to use it does not cause my thumb to cramp. Maybe it does after an hour of playing Stardew Valley without moving my hand, but obviously I would have no experience doing that, so I don't even know why I'm commenting on it. Obviously, I've never done that before. The D-pad is right next to the joystick on the Steam Deck, which isn't a problem because that high of a placement makes it really comfortable to use for long periods of time, but it being as mushy as it is has caused a lot of misinputs for me in games like Celeste and other games where the inputs actually matter. It's an issue that Loki doesn't have. it's one that I haven't even run into because the D-pad is so directional. You hit one direction, you go that direction. You can't really have a misinput. And this isn't to say that the Steam Deck has bad controls. It's just that I think that the ones on the Loki Max and the Loki in general are better. All right, I think I've gotten it into your head that the Loki has better feeling controls with a slight RGB sized downside in there, but that issue only exists on here because the Steam Deck doesn't even have RGB lights. So how about we move on to the games I've been playing on here. So if you picked up on a little bit of a context clue earlier, or you know me in real life, you would know that I've been playing a lot of Stardew Valley on here. And I mean a lot. A lot of that playtime has been on my Loki. It used to be exclusively on my Loki, but I have kind of slightly switched over to PC gaming, like playing on my big PC over here, just because I've been kind of streaming the game very infrequently. I know, I'm sorry, I haven't streamed in a while, but I have reasons. But also, sometimes it's just easier to play on my PC. But a lot of my playtime has been spent on the Loki. Stardew Valley is also a game that lets you choose between the joystick and the D-pad in terms of what you want to use for direction inputs. And for the most part, I've stuck with the D-pad because, like I said, the D-pad is in such a good spot that it's very easy to just reach down and use and keep my hand there for long periods of time without feeling uncomfortable. It's interesting because on most handhelds for games that let you use both the joystick and D-pad, most of the time I'd opt for the joystick just because that's usually in a more comfortable spot. But this device has such a great proportions in terms of where everything is laid out that I think it's just a lot easier to use the D-pad. And using the joystick for Stardew Valley feels wrong, so don't really want to do that. I have been using the D-pad for other 2D games like Curse of Golf, Cuphead, Sonic Mania, and as previously mentioned, Celeste. And yes, I understand that this device is overkill for those games, but I like to know that each of them will run really well. Don't get me wrong, I have also been using the joystick for a lot of 3D games, but most of them are emulated rather than actually 3D AAA modern day games. So a little bit of a story time. I did want to continue my Shadow of the Tomb Raider save file on here when I first got it, but I quickly learned that the save files for the Steam Deck version and the Windows version do not work together. Like the Steam Cloud save just doesn't work. It doesn't for some reason. The Linux version of the game and the Windows version don't cooperate well. There were solutions online that I tried and at the time they didn't work, but now I try them again and they did, which might sound like a good thing, but they synced the Windows version of my save, so my Steam Deck save is completely gone. It's just gone. I couldn't recover it. I actually tried. It was gone. So I downloaded a save file and put it on there. So let's just pretend. Maybe now we'll consider touching the game again, but knowing me, I'll probably put 1,000 more hours into Stardew Valley before I touch that game again, especially since I've already played so far and it's like, I got so discouraged when I lost that save file. I've also played a lot of Resident Evil Village, which I know I touched on my previous review, but I wanted to touch on it again because I have played a little bit more of it. I haven't played all that much more of it because I am kind of a wimp, and I turned off the game at the absolute worst part in like a red hallway with after a scary sequence. So now whenever I turn on the game, I'm in a red hallway and I decide, no, I don't want to play this game right now and be terrified. So I turn it off, and that's where I've been for the past 4 months. I have so many 3D games in my Steam library that I should probably play, but Stardew Valley takes up a lot of my time and I'm pretty stupid, so 3D exploration games confuse me. But I mean, I did buy the 2 ukulele games, which are 3D platformers and use the joystick primarily on Steam, so I guess that counts. But I mean, I did only play the first one and not even the full thing at that, so I guess it doesn't really. I have also played a good amount of Cyberpunk 2077 on here, which I actually really like. I think it's a really fun game, but these damn file sizes are just too big. And to be honest, I probably would play more 3D platformers if these games weren't so damn large. Like, I've wanted to reinstall and keep playing Cyberpunk so many times, but the file size is too big, and I don't want to delete Resident Evil Village. So I just haven't played it since. 512 gigabytes of storage may seem like a lot, but for modern AAA games, that it really isn't all that much in terms of how many games I have and want to play. And it's probably why I've been so drawn to 2D, low-powered indie games, because they're small. Stardew Valley is less than a gigabyte. They're small, they're fun, they're creative, and like I said, they're fun to play. Even though this thing is meant for more high-end PC gaming, I do find myself playing a lot of low-end games. I should just be using my Loki Zero for these low-powered games because I have it right here and it has Chimera OS on here, but it's just so convenient to have a device that can play both low-end and high-end games in the same device. Look at this thing. This thing can play Cyberpunk and Stardew Valley. This thing can play Stardew Valley. Kinda. I do have a lot of ROMs, so that might be why the storage space has been taken up very easily, but shh, I like complaining about file sizes. Speaking of power, this thing gets loud. Even when I'm just playing Stardew Valley, this thing can get pretty loud. Like, it's not super noticeable loud, but like, you can hear it. And like, sometimes it'll get so loud that the tunnel vision I get while playing Stardew Valley will break, and I hear it. So I'm not entirely wrapped into Stardew Valley. And don't even get me started on high-end games. This thing sounds like a freaking jet engine when I try to start up Resident Evil Village or Cyberpunk. This thing's so loud. But to be fair, so does almost every other Windows handheld, and not even the Steam Deck is free from the jet engine fans. But it's still something I wanted to touch on because it's still an issue. It's still something that happens, so I felt like touching on it. It's not something that should be super surprising because people have been talking about it ever since like the ROG Ally, the Lenovo Legion Go, all those devices have been coming out, but I felt like it's still something I should touch on. The Loki Max uses an AMD 6800U processor, which is not the most powerful processor you can get right now, and at the time of release, it wasn't even the most powerful. But I still think it's pretty powerful because these upgrades have been pretty incremental. I've played games like Cyberpunk, Resident Evil Village, and Horizon Zero Dawn on here at full TDP, but they've played all pretty well at settings that aren't the bare minimum. And while the battery life leaves something to be desired, they run well. Performance, I think, would be comparable to like a gaming laptop or something. It's not gonna... The battery life might be less than an hour, but the games are gonna run. I think the performance is kind of like a gaming laptop. You can run a lot of power intense games that the Steam Deck won't run or some like other devices won't run, but the battery might die within the hour. Like many of the things I've talked about so far, issues with the battery life are not exclusive to this thing. Just from the top of my head, I know that the Steam Deck has similar battery life issues, especially when it comes to high-end games, which is why I usually leave these devices plugged in while using them. Wherever I am, this thing is usually plugged into the nearest outlet, even when I'm just playing Stardew Valley, and that's really just because I don't trust the battery life all too much to be playing it off of the battery. The Steam Deck does do a better job in terms of battery. It's still not great, but these games, these high-end games especially, are very power intensive, so that draws a lot of battery from whatever device you're using. Your battery life won't be horrible if you play exclusively low-end games, if Retro Game Corps is to be trusted, but it's still not great. I'm no expert, but I am excited for the day that one of these handhelds has a battery life that's longer than 3 hours, even if that day is like 20 years in the future. So I know I touched on it earlier, but I do want to talk more about why I haven't been using this thing as an emulation device as I kind of expected to when I first bought it. It's weird because before I got this thing, I was so excited to have a device that would be able to emulate Switch and Wii U games at a good frame rate. But now that I have this, I've run into a similar problem that I ran into with the Steam Deck back when I first got it, which is, even though I've gone through all of the trouble to get these games working, get them running at full speed, I don't have any interest in playing them. I think that's because while it was cool that I can emulate these games, I really don't need to. I have a Wii U that has all of these games I'd want to emulate already here on my shelf, and the Switch is already portable. So if I wanted to play a Switch game, I'd pick up the Switch and start playing it. And even then, even though I wanted to kind of use this device or use the Steam Deck as like a way to continue or finish games that I started or maybe didn't even start on the Switch and finish them, I don't feel attached to these games as much. Like, especially for newer games, I can get through like an old game. If I'm playing like a GameCube game or something like that, I can get through it because it's like, they're emulating it on the Switch already. I can already play it. So that's not as much of a detach because I never really had it. But because I own these games, I'd rather just play them on their original hardware, the hardware that they're made for. It is kind of cool for Wii U games because you can't take the Wii U out in public without being weird. But even then, it's like most of the Wii U's best games have been ported to the Switch. So I'd just play them out and about on the Switch. So while I did buy this thing with the intention of playing games on it, and a large chunk of my original review was just emulation testing, I don't really play that many emulators on here, which I guess is a good thing because it just pushes me more towards PC gaming, but I feel like that's such a weird switch to have. This switch has also been made because I have a lot of different devices that can already play up to Switch games that aren't Windows handhelds. Emulation capabilities are cool, and I was very excited for it when I first got it, but so many factors just went into it, especially me becoming more of a PC gamer now, and it just has all culminated in me not ever really using this thing for emulation like I thought I would. If you asked me 2 years ago when I first pre-ordered this thing, if I thought what I'd be using this thing for when I first got it, my first answer would probably be emulation. But now 2 years later, I can confidently say I don't remember when the last time I opened an emulator on this thing was. Like if I want to play 3DS games or Switch games or something like that, I'd use my Odin 2 or Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. Like one of these things is Android, works better, and has a better battery life. Why wouldn't I just use those? But to end that rant and to wrap things up, I've fallen in love with this thing more than I ever expected to. It's an AYN device and I love the Odin, but their sporadic updates via their Discord and long wait time to even get the device made me worry that I wasn't gonna love this thing as much as I loved the Odin, and I'm glad to say I definitely do. Everything about it was a major upgrade from the original Odin, and for their first Windows device, I think they did an amazing job. The joysticks are big and feel nice to use, the D-pad and face buttons are big and clicky, the triggers feel really nice, and while the bumpers feel kinda mushy, they're still great, and don't even get me started on the grips. The grips make the device feel super comfortable because they help to off-balance the weight that comes from the device. It's still heavy, but the grips make it a lot easier to hold for long periods of time. Just make sure that if you play Stardew Valley for over an hour in the same exact position on your bed, which is something I've definitely never done, I don't know why you're looking at me like that, make sure you move your hand every once in a while because your hand might go numb. This is just a bit of a tip. I learned it from a friend. Don't worry about it. But yeah, I really like this thing and think it was worth the money spent on it over 21 months ago. 21 months. But what do you guys think? Is there something about the device that I didn't touch on that you want to hear more about? Did you originally have a pre-order in but cancel it after their sporadic updates made you worry? Were you someone who kept their pre-order in after a long period of time? Do you want to buy one now? I will say that I checked their website and all of the models are out of stock. Like seems like perpetually out of stock. And I emailed them asking, hey, are these ever going to be back in stock? And they never emailed me back. So I don't even know how you're going to get it. But if you are thinking about getting one, I don't think you'll regret it. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you next week for a video. Hopefully. I'll see you then. Goodbye.